town of Natchitoches and the surrounding Cane River country of Louisiana lived 4 fascinating women, 2 black and 2 white, who have made unique cultural contributions to the area. Each lived in the patriarchal society of the South and could hardly be expected to have overcome the difficulties inherent in her particular environment in a male-dominated society. However, each did just that, and thus was able to achieve significant cultural accomplishments that were to influence their contemporaries as well as future generations, thus ensuring them a role as major cultural transfer agents. The first life to be examined is that of Marie Therese Quinquin, who in the first half of the 1700s began her life as a slave in the household of the commandant of the French frontier post in Natchitoches, Louis Gécheraud de Saint-Denis. What we know about this remarkable woman is made up of both fact and legend. The factual exists in many old documents in the parish courthouse and in church records. The traditional has been handed down through word of mouth by her countless descendants, estimated at over 10,000. Church records tell us that the infant Marie Therese was baptized on August 24, 1742. Neither the exact date of her death nor the location of her burial place is known, but the last records of her selling land and transferring slaves to her children and grandchildren are dated in March and April of 1816. During those 74 years, Marie Therese had lived a life which is almost unbelievable by standards of either fact or fiction. Little is known of Marie Therese's childhood, but we do know that when she was 17 years old, she gave birth to the first of her 14 children. Sometime between 1761 and 1766, Marie Therese became the property of Saint Denis' youngest sister, Madame de Soto. In 1767, Marie Therese was leased from Madame de Soto by Claude Thomas Pierre Metoyer, a young Frenchman at the Natchitoches post, a white man who became the father of 8 of her children. And in July 1778, Metoyer purchased her and their infant son, Joseph. Shortly afterwards, in a private document, he declared that they were free. The liaison between Marie Therese and Pierre Metoyer apparently ended in 1786. But in November of that year, he gave her a piece of land which was the beginning of her extensive holdings, worked by numerous slaves which she purchased. With earnings from these lands, she was able to buy the freedom of her black children and grandchildren. Also, through Metoyer, she secured the freedom of their children, whom he recognized in various legal documents. It is believed by this remarkable woman's descendants that the central focus of her holdings was Yucca, now known as the famed Melrose Plantation. The story is that it was she who directed the construction of the African house which stands today, but more likely her son built it several years after her death. In any case, it was through the French-African children of Claude Thomas Pierre Metoyer and Marie Therese Quinquin that the Cane River Creoles of color began the settlement of Isle Breville community. The mixture of the two cultures can easily be detected even today. It is centered around Melrose Plantation and across Cane River on Isle Breville, where the St. Augustine Catholic Church stands. It is here that a large portrait of Augustine Metoyer, son of Pierre Metoyer and Marie Therese, overlooks the congregation, many of whom are their direct descendants. Over her lifetime, Marie was able to buy lands and slaves, to buy the freedom of her black children and grandchildren, and through Metoyer to secure the freedom of their children, whom he recognized in various legal documents. The heritage of Marie Therese has been a race of people still identifiable over 250 years later. Community of Melrose that a second remarkable woman lived and made invaluable contributions to the cultivation and preservation of the literature, folklore, arts, crafts, and botanical life of Louisiana, and particularly of the Cane River country. Born on Scattery Plantation in Assumption Parish on January 14, 1871, Cammie Garrett Henry, as a child, loved to keep scrapbooks of clippings, pictures, notes, and letters, anything that interested her. She attended Louisiana Normal School in Natchitoches, and while there met John H. Henry, whom she married on January 11, 1894. They first lived on a plantation called Henryville near Derry, Louisiana, but in 1898 they moved to Melrose Plantation. It was here that Cammie Henry reared her 7 children, 6 sons and a daughter, and lived for the next 50 years until her death in 1948. Being the mistress of a huge plantation, bearing 7 children, caring for a large home, were never enough for this woman of superior intelligence, insatiable curiosity, and a deep abiding interest in the people of all kinds, black or white. The scrapbook habit continued on a huge scale. Whole volumes of clippings and photographs on Louisiana history, interesting personalities, old homes, writers, books, every subject that attracted her attention filled her library shelves and overflowed antique armoires on back galleries of the home. Cammie Henry said she could not leave her home to meet people whom she would like to know. Therefore, she invited them to come visit her. For guest houses, she scoured the countryside for old log cabins, which she moved to Melrose Plantation, reconstructed, modernized with bathrooms, and furnished with antiques gathered from old homes nearby. Artists, writers, and craftsmen of all kinds came to stay in her log cabins, to work and to be inspired by Miss Cammie, or Aunt Cammie, as she was called by many of her friends. To mention a few, Rachel Field and Roark Bradford visited for a time. Lyle Saxon and Francois Mignon lived and wrote in the house called Yucca from the early plantation. Alberta Kinsey came each year to paint magnolias, and famed Francis P. Benjamin to photograph plantation scenes. Weaving became one of Miss Cammie's great joys, a favorite hobby. An old loom, long deserted in the attic of an antebellum barn, was resurrected and restored. Mrs. Henry had the ability to recognize genius in a workman and made the best of it. In the weaving department, she encouraged Henry Herzog, plantation field hand, to become acquainted with the loom. He was a natural, could thread any pattern for her weaving skill. Yards of draperies, upholstery material, rugs, and bedspreads were the result. She taught Natchitoches friends to weave, and today there are still people who are practicing the art because of her teaching and inspiration. It was Mrs. Henry who encouraged the residents of Isle Breville to preserve their heritage. She had them tell the stories of their forebears to those who would write them down. She had an artist restore the portrait of their ancestor, Marie Metoyer, that now hangs in the church. She encouraged any talent that she could detect: wood carving, bookbinding, basket making, quilting, and spinning, to name a few. Another great interest was plant life. She and her friend, the naturalist Caroline Dorman, developed an iris garden at Melrose. They searched the swamps of Louisiana for wild species, hybridized others. Pink and white magnolias, the yucca plant, which gave the plantation its first name. Great persimmon trees, gourd gardens, and crepe myrtles of all hues, from deep wine red to snow white, were everywhere. After her death, Cammie Henry's domain was sold, and her infinite collections were auctioned off by her heirs. Happily, though, the firm that purchased the great cotton fields and pecan groves gave the big house and its surrounding buildings on 10 acres of land to the Association for the Preservation of Historic Natchitoches. Another woman connected with the same locale has probably brought more fame to the area than any other individual since the founding of the settlement of Natchitoches in 1714. Her name is Clementine Hunter, and she is a tiny black woman over 90 years of age. Most of her life was spent as a field hand on Hidden Hill and Melrose plantations. In the 1940s, she became a cook for Mrs. Henry, and it was there that she began to paint. Alberta Kinsey at Melrose to paint the magnolias threw away some twisted tubes of paint. Clementine took those and an old piece of window shade and, as she says, marked a picture. That was the beginning of a fabulous career as a painter of plantation primitives. She used pieces of cardboard, old shingles, anything she could find. Francois Mignon, then a writer in residence at Melrose, recognized her unique talent of catching on canvas, or whatever the surface, remarkably true-to-life scenes, funerals, baptizings, wash day, and pecan-picking scenes, weddings, fish fries, cotton picking, and ginning are favorite subjects. Using rather static figures, she nevertheless manages to catch simple characteristics which identify familiar figures on the plantation. Her art has captured a way of life many black people have lived in the rural South for generations. With the advent of mechanized farming and the movement of many Southern blacks to the urban center of the North after World War II, seeking jobs, the rural life of blacks has been almost completely changed in the past 35 years. Clementine Hunter, during her 90 years of life in this area, has seen this change and recalls the way of the past on canvas.
My head. In my head. Just in my mind. That's the way I paint, by my mind. Anything come in my mind, I try to paint it. Oh, it just got in my mind. I just got a piece of paper, paste bowl, mark on that. I didn't know it was right or wrong. I just painted. Every one I painted, I gave it away. I didn't keep none of it. That's the way I paint.
On the top floor of the African House at Melrose, she has painted murals that portrays the numerous activities of plantation life. Few persons have managed, like the artist Hunter, to preserve visual documentation of this past lifestyle for the heritage of black children in the future. In recent years, her paintings have been a part of several prominent traveling exhibits of Afro-American art. She's had one-woman shows at numerous galleries, a museum to house her paintings, and a library of clippings and photographs. Books about Clementine and museum catalogs of the Hunter shows is now being organized in Natchitoches. From the humble little sketches and crude oil paintings which she sold for 25 cents, the artist's canvases are in great demand and hang in museums all over the country. Her primitives have recorded a fast disappearing way of life on a southern plantation for generations to come. All three of the women we have talked about were in one way or another connected with one locality. However, the fourth one lived about 10 miles down the Cane River in the town of Cloutierville, Louisiana. Her name was Kate Chopin, and she could truly be called a woman before her time, as her work was far in advance in theme and technique of other writers of her day. Her novel, The Awakening, seems very mild to people today, but in 1899, when it first appeared, it shocked the populace to no end and was banned by the Mercantile Library of St. Louis, her hometown. Catherine O'Flaherty was born in 1851. Her mother was from a French Catholic family, and Kate was under the influence of French culture all of her life. In St. Louis, she was educated in a convent school. After her marriage to Oscar Chopin, a banker, they lived first in New Orleans, and later the family moved to the little Cane River town of Cloutierville. Oscar died in 1882, and Kate moved back to St. Louis, where she had to make a living for her children. There was little in the way of occupations open to women at that time, but Kate had long wanted to write for publication. She used her exact and detailed memories of her life in Louisiana as a basis for her short stories, which appeared in various magazines: Saturday Evening Post, Atlantic Monthly, Youth's Companion, and Century. A collection of her stories and sketches appeared under the title of Bayou Folk in 1894, and another called A Night in Arcadia in 1897. However, it is her novel, The Awakening, which has achieved the greatest critical acclaim. In The Awakening, a married woman seeks love and fulfillment elsewhere, a theme which shocked Kate Chopin's contemporaries, especially since the book was written by a woman who was subsequently barred from membership in the Fine Arts Club of St. Louis. In nearly all of Kate's best work, it is the characterization of strong women personalities which dominate her writing. However, she also showed great talent in describing minor characters as well. The sustained use of images and symbols is apparent in The Awakening. It has been remarked that it was not only the sensuous scenes in her book that shocked Kate's critics, but even more, it was the tone of approval which the author seemed to give to the writing. Also, it was feared that she made her readers feel the same way. The spirit of Kate Chopin did not die when she died. Over the decades, her home in Cloutierville passed through many hands. In 1964, Mrs. Mildred McCoy purchased the house, which she restored and furnished with suitable antiques of the period. She opened the house as Bayou Folk Museum, with memorabilia connected with the famous writer. Chopin heirlooms have been presented on loan by members of her family. Scholars used the library in preparing manuscripts on Kate Chopin, who dared to be a woman before her time. She could be considered an early liberated woman who became an agent of cultural transfer in her day and then rediscovered 60 years later as women began to question their role in society and seek equality in life. These four women whose lives we have discussed would seem at first glance to have little in common. However, that statement is not true. All of them can be said to have been strong-willed, to have dared to defy custom by moving outside the role assigned to women in their social group. Marie Metoyer, the slave who owned slaves and started a dynasty. Cammie Henry, plantation wife and mother, who surrounded herself with artists, writers, and craftsmen, and preserved for all posterity the fruits of their labors. Clementine Hunter, field hand and cook, who with paint and canvas records the black experience of life on a Louisiana plantation. And Kate Chopin, who dared to be a pioneer in the literary world by writing realistic stories on subjects heretofore forbidden to women writers, thereby influencing the modern novel to a great extent. All four can be said to be agents of cultural transfer whose influence will never die.